Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. We are ready to talk part 2, child development and spiritual formation. We just had so much to try to put into one episode that we decided to try to split it out a little bit. How are you doing today, Dr. Virginia?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for us to keep going. I know our first one, we were like, well, we'll try to squeeze it in one. But I'm excited for us to keep going and to get finished.
Well, and we keep talking about how this is a subject we could talk about for days. I mean, we could do, we could probably do 30, 40 minutes on each one age individually. And so it's really hard for us to not get so excited that we just kind of keep going on about it. So
I taught like a 6-week-long adult discipleship class about child development and spiritual formation, which I'm hoping to do again pretty soon. So yeah.
It's so helpful. It's really great information. And if you're wondering, why do I need to know about childhood development? Why do I need to understand this about kids? And it's because it is so very important for us to keep in mind how children learn when we're teaching them, because they are so very different at different developmental levels. And so you really need to kind of think, oh, wait, the characteristics of my first graders are very different from the characteristics of my fifth graders. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind as you're developing your curricula, as you're figuring out what you're wanting to teach, as you're choosing material to use for a Bible study, for a Wednesday evening, for those different times. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to kind of think through. Well, there's so much. I love the older elementary age. And so I just have a few things that we can talk about today about working with those 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, those that are in the upper elementary going into middle school or in the beginning stages of middle school. There's a lot of churches divide up their children's ministry in a wide variety of ways. Right. Some churches have kindergarten through 6th grade in their elementary department in their children's ministry. Some go from 1st grade through 5th grade. There's some go. I've worked with some that work kindergarten through 4th because in their school system, 5th grade begins middle school. So they have a middle school department. And so the thing that I usually recommended to churches is when you're looking at your 5th and 6th graders, you really need to think about your community, your church community, and also think about your youth ministry. If you have a youth ministry that's just all together, where you have all the kids together in the youth ministry, having 5th and 6th graders included in a classroom with juniors and seniors
is a big difference.
It's a big difference. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, middle school and high school, they're good together. It's fine. It's no big deal. But honestly, again, developmentally, a 5th grader is just so very different from a senior in high school. And so thinking, and I know that it's really hard because a lot of people will say, well, parents don't want them in the children's ministry anymore, when they're in middle school because they want them, then create a preteen ministry within your children's ministry so that you do have your 4th and 5th graders or your 5th and 6th graders, in their own department within your children's ministry and maybe offer some different things for them and have them set separately. But again, they're just very, very young to be included in a youth ministry if that youth ministry has all of the age groups kind of together in all their activities and all the things. You really want to get together with your church staff and think through, how do we want to design our preschool, children's, preteen, youth ministries, student ministries? How do we want to have these classes set up so you can provide the spiritual development that they need at the stage that they're in? And
And
so
the more
that
that you
makes them very
can
unique.
coordinate, I know this isn't necessarily the topic of this episode, but the more that you can coordinate between those different age graded ministries to be intentional in having those age graded ministries build upon each other, the more cohesive you can make that, the better experience that's going to be for your kids, and the more effective you can teach them, because it's so easy for us to get kind of siloed in our different areas and our different age graded ministries.
It is, especially with children's ministers and youth ministers, because like I said, youth ministry is such its own unique,
it's its own thing.
kind of, it has very specific needs, and the personalities of youth ministers are very unique. They have the things that they need to be focused on, and the things that they need to be able to do are so very different typically. And a lot of times I always felt like the den mother to the youth ministers, trying to say, but don't forget about this, or think about safety and security, or, like all those kinds of things. But needless to say, I always try to be sure to have a really close relationship with the student minister, with the youth minister, because exactly what you said, I wanted to have a seamless transition when they were leaving, when the kids were leaving children's ministry and moving into student ministry. I wanted them to have a really great transition there. And so I wanted to coordinate how we said goodbye to our kids in the children's ministry, but also I wanted them prepared for what they were moving into. And so I do think it's really important for you to sit down as a staff and say, this is what our preschool looks like. What do we need to do to prepare our preschoolers for our children's ministry? And then look at, how do we prepare our children's ministry for our student ministry? And do we have a preteen ministry? And how are we going to help them grow into that space? And so you really do have to be able to work together to do that. And so I think it's really important to think about that. I think one of the other things that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned is that when you are working with the younger elementary, first, second, third graders, you're working with kids who are even if they have been in church since preschool, they're just moving into a children's ministry. They're just really starting to understand spiritual development. They're beginning their own personal relationship with Jesus. And so they're just learning all of these things for the first time. They're learning the Bible verses. They're learning the books of the Bible. They're learning the stories. And so they're all kind of at the same level. When you move into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, now you're looking at kids that have had a wide variety of experiences when it comes to church. One reason is because now you have a lot more kids who sleep over at friends' houses on Saturday night, or went to a ball game, or did something on Saturday. So they're staying with friends. So they're coming to church with their friends. And some of them are walking into the church building for the very first time when they're coming with their friends. And what we have a tendency to do when we're teaching is that we expect that all of our kids know everything that they should know because they've been with us in first grade, second grade, third grade. And so we tell these stories, or we mention things. Like we'll play a game and we'll just immediately go into a question about David and Goliath, thinking, oh, well, everyone knows that story. But when you're working with kids in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, some of them may have never heard about it before. I can remember I was in a class one time, I think it was 4th grade, it might have been 5th grade, and we were talking, and a girl raised her hand at the beginning of the story, and I called on her, and she said, "You keep saying God. What is God?" She had never been to church before. Her family had never talked about God or the Bible. And so she was there with a friend. It was her first time. And so literally when I was talking about God, she had no concept of who that was. And I know a lot of people will tell me, well, that doesn't make any sense. Everybody knows who God is. Not everybody knows who God is. If you don't have that background, if you don't have any history with any type of church experience or any type
Maybe only heard it as a
Bible.
swear word.
Right.
Yeah.
She had no
Yeah.
concept of who God
Yeah.
was as a
Yeah.
person.
Mhm.
And so it was that idea of like, okay, wow, I needed to be more mindful
Yeah.
of the fact that I had a visitor in the room, and I needed to make sure I went all the way back to the beginning of this, story, and make sure I laid a
Yeah.
foundation before I jumped into it. And so it's those kinds of things that make us remember that we sometimes put our experiences onto others,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially if you grow up in a certain area, or if you grow up in church, or if you grow up with parents that have a certain experience, then you
Mhm.
just assume that everyone's had that same experience, and they have not. And so it's really, really important with older elementary, with preteens, as you come into that. The neat thing about that age, that 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-olds, they are beginning to analytically process information and think
Yeah.
for themselves.
Mhm.
They have a better developed vocabulary, and their thinking skills are more advanced. So they are able to look at the stories that you tell, the situations that you tell, and they're able
Mhm.
to think a little bit more critically for themselves. They don't need it spoon-fed as much. They can take the information and begin to process it on their own, because they are beginning to understand they're beginning to understand cause and effect. Like,
Mhm.
they know, if this happens, then this is going to happen. They can
Mhm.
begin to problem solve
Mhm. Mhm.
more individually, as opposed to having to do it with a great deal of guidance like the early elementary age needs to. So they are beginning to think more abstractly, so they can like look at situations and begin to process.
So at this age, children are developing those building blocks of
Mhm.
abstract thought, just like what you're talking about. And so, whereas in the younger ages, in the early elementary ages, that's a great time to focus a lot on memorization and just sort of imparting a lot of basic biblical truths. In the latter elementary years, we see multiple things happening.
Oh yeah.
um, One is that switch from learning to read
Mhm.
to reading to learn.
Right.
And that's a big switch that happens in those years. And so we
Yes.
can um, do a lot more with reading information. We still want to be cautious because we know there are kids with,
Oh yeah.
dyslexia and other, learning disabilities. But reading to learn, they can start working through like multi-step processes. They can start analyzing information, comparing, contrasting. These are all different things that we can do with these older elementary ages as they are developing those foundational skills for abstract
Right.
thought.
Right. Well, and that's what's so great. One of the things that I enjoy doing with this age is to just do the large pieces of paper and a pencil, and let them in groups work together to find the answers to questions.
Mm-hmm.
After hearing the Bible story, then have a few key questions that I want them to kind of think through. But I'm going to have them do that in a group, because of what you had said earlier about the fact that we do have a, a great deal of disparity between reading
Mm-hmm.
abilities at this age, where you're going to have some kids that are very strong readers and can read very well because they do have a growing vocabulary. They're able to read a new word and kind of start to infer what it means, as opposed to needing somebody to exactly tell them what every single word means when they're reading new information. But again, because you have those differing abilities, I try to put kids together, stronger readers with maybe weaker readers, in small groups, so that they have that ability to be able to work together to try to find the answers to things, but that it's not all of the pressure just on one.
Right.
And so that way they do have the ability to be able to use those skills as they're learning
Mm-hmm.
in the classroom setting, and to be able to work together because they enjoy working together. But it's also making sure that we're setting them up to succeed. The biggest thing we have to remember is that we are in church, we're not in school. So I want the activities to be fun and
Fun.
engaging, and I want them to
Yes.
learn, but I don't want that pressure of them feeling like it's
Mm-hmm.
something that they can't do,
Mm-hmm.
because I want them to feel very successful in the work that they're doing when they're in church. And so it's finding that kind of balance as I'm watching them work, and as I'm, helping them work. And so that's what's so exciting, is to see them begin to problem solve, to understand that cause and effect and be able to look at a situation and be able to guess what might happen next and what's going to happen next and what options that particular person from the story has, and have them kind of think through, well, what could they have done here? Could they have, what could they have done differently? Those kinds of questions are fun because it gives them that chance to kind of play around with the story a little bit and be able to think, oh, wait, what if he had done this? Then this would have happened. This is why he had to do this. And so it helps to be able to do that. And so it's amazing, though, when you think through, like we've talked about the levels of biblical learning a lot. And I love the levels of biblical learning, but it also helps you as you are creating your material for a particular class time. So, for example, if you're looking at what a first and second grader can understand about God, one of the things it says is that God hears and answers prayer. The first and second grader can understand God can hear my prayer and he can answer my prayer. In grades 3 and 4, it steps up that concept to God hears people's prayers and communicates with them. So it sort of takes that up a notch. But then when you hit preteen, it says God knows the desires of my heart and wants me to pray. So it's taking that each grade can handle a little bit more specific information, a little bit more of an abstract point when you're moving into the older age. So they're able to think abstractly. They're able to kind of think, oh, wait, God knows what I want, but he still wants me to have that relationship with him. So they begin to understand how to make it more personal. And so it moves it up.
I did get a copy of the new Ages and Stages,
which is the new
yes, the new levels of biblical learning is what it has. This is what it looks like. It's got circles, blue and green circles.
I'm really excited. Wait, I want to know, open it for a second. Is it still chart form, or is it more laid out as a book?
No, it's still chart form.
It's still chart form.
So, so this is the new levels of biblical learning. It is called Ages and Stages now.
All right, great. Yay. I'm out of the loop these days, so I don't get all the new material like I used to. So it's fun to see. I get excited. Oh, well, one of the other things that we need to remember about preteens are that they're old enough to begin to adopt their own personal belief system. So they are beginning to create that foundation for what they are going to believe as they grow older. They are really, really interested in their community. And so they are developing a conscience and a value system. So they're beginning to understand the repercussions from actions, but they are also beginning to see how that can affect people around them more. Not to say that they're not still very self-centered, because they are still very self-centered. And that's the way God created them to be for a reason. They are learning about themselves. And so they are still very self-centered. But at this age, they are beginning to be able to see others' needs and be able to sort of start thinking about how their actions have certain consequences and how their actions can affect others. And so it's neat to see them as they grow and begin to understand that. And they're looking at their group and they're wanting to know, how can I help my friends? How can I help my community? How can I be a part of this to make a difference, and how I can change things? And so they're beginning to understand and see the needs of others and not just themselves quite as much.
It's like their own little personal world is starting to expand.
Right. And those interests and those beliefs are going to change dramatically as they grow. One day they may swear they are never going to eat meat again for the rest of their lives. And then the next day they want you to take them to Taco Bell. They are learning about others' beliefs. They are learning about other cultures. And so they want to begin to adopt things, but they're still learning about them and understanding that long-term commitment. Now, with preteens, you can see that they do commit more, but honestly, it still is not long-term. They are not necessarily going to be able to commit to doing something for a long period of time, but they can understand about making commitments and trying to make commitments, and they have the intentions are to do that. And talking about how quickly their interests change, also their moods change very dramatically. I think we've talked about this before, I feel like in one episode for something, but you have to realize that the changes in hormones that are happening at this age is very quick. And we as adults have had time to learn how to deal with mood changes and hormone changes and just changes within our own bodies and how things work. Preteens have not had very long to be able to learn how to do that. And so when they are inundated with these chemical changes within their body, when they are dealing with changes in their environment and people and dealing with difficult people or different people, because a lot of times children might not be as experienced working in a group as other children. Some have been socialized greatly. Some have been very sheltered for a very long time. And so for them to begin working with people with different personalities and different tendencies, it's difficult for them. And so their moods change pretty quickly. And so you have to stay on top of that when you're working with them, to understand that sometimes they do need a minute to take a breath. Sometimes they do need a break. Sometimes they need to walk away for a second. And you need to have those opportunities for them to be able to just sort of figure out how to adjust the feelings that they are dealing with at that particular moment.
And one thing we talk about too with child development in general is it's not strictly linear. It's more of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And so, just because you have maybe an 11-year-old who on some days can seem very mature, can seem just like they are going in the right direction, and then the next day they just have like a meltdown. And so they're not doing it intentionally. They not
really
doing
aren't.
it to frustrate you. They're not doing it. It's just we as adults have to keep in mind everything Valerie is saying, and that development is not strictly linear. Like they will have hard days. They will have days when it's like, why are you acting like this? Like you haven't acted like this in years. Like, what are you doing? And that it's okay. It's normal. We have to be that place of, calm. And like you said, give them a moment, and calm them with our calmness. Like just because they're having a hard day, we can stay calm and we can encourage them even in that hard day or that seemingly developmental regression or whatever's going on.
Because, and we don't know what they're dealing with when they are walking into the classroom. Family situations, home situations are so very different. And even when you see a family that you think seem to be very stable and very balanced, that doesn't necessarily mean that when they are home, it's very stable or very balanced.
That's right.
And unfortunately, as children get older, sometimes parents tend to think they can handle things that they really are not capable of handling yet. And so they are dealing with a lot of transition, a lot of change, a lot of instability often. And so we do have to remember that we don't know what happened in their home the night before. We don't know exactly what's going on. And so again, they have not learned yet how to handle those emotions and those changes. And so we have to be very patient with them and understand that even if you think they are doing something on purpose, they are really not doing it on purpose in the way that you think that they are. Yes, they might be trying to get attention. Yes, they may be very frustrated. Yes, they don't know what to do with their emotions. But also they're sometimes they are desperately crying out for help in ways that we don't necessarily understand. And so for us to be able to find ways to encourage them and find things that interest them and be able to distract them for those moments while they're there with you so that they can have fun and they can enjoy themselves, but know that it's a safe place and know that you care about them and know that you really do, that you do have patience with them and understanding and that you just want to listen. Sometimes they just need to have somebody that they can talk to because they just never get to talk to anyone. And so it's those kinds of things that we have to kind of think about when we're working with this age, because there's so much going on underneath that we have to kind of be prepared for. And so it's a lot more complicated than we think it is when we are thinking about how children are able to handle their emotions and be able to handle that. And that's one of the reasons that one of the things that we need to remember too, you can't look at all fifth graders and expect them all to be exactly the same, all to be on the same level developmentally, all socially at the same level, because they are not. We know scientifically that girls develop more quickly than boys.
Mhm.
They physically grow faster than boys do.
Mhm.
And they also,
Puberty begins
cognitive,
earlier.
yes,
Mhm.
puberty does begin earlier for girls than it does for boys. So that's why you do typically have the taller girls in the classroom than
Mhm.
the boys. And you have that awkward, feeling that the girls have around the boys. And you also have cognitive development that's very different. And that goes all the way through, it's girls just cognitively develop a little
Mhm.
faster than boys do. And so it's another reason why this age prefers to interact with members of their own sex. They feel
Mhm.
very awkward around,
Mhm.
girls and boys feel awkward around each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so you do tend to have a little more drama when you're working with boys and girls together. And so girls
Uh-huh.
do tend to prefer. And so I really
Mhm.
have always tried when I work out groups for games and for activities in this age, I really do try to keep the boys with boys and girls with girls, or at least have two of each in a
Right.
group so that they are more comfortable, because they
Yeah.
can be very uncomfortable. And if I don't have the ability to make that ratio work, then I try to do something different or try to,
Mhm.
kind of work around that. One of the other things that I wanted to make sure to mention is that when you are working with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, you are looking at a group of kids that are really looking for the approval of others.
Mhm.
They're not only looking for approval within their own peer group, but they are also looking for approval from parents, from teachers, from older people, from leaders. And they really do desire recognition. They just want to be told that they're
Yeah.
doing a good job, that things are going okay. And
Right.
sometimes that's why they do act out. When we think about kids that really try to make a big deal in the classroom, or really
Mhm.
try to show out, or they're making jokes when they shouldn't be, or they're talking when they shouldn't be,
Mhm.
typically
Mhm.
you're going to find that those kids are just looking for attention. They're just
Right.
looking for somebody
Some
to
adult
respond to them.
one-on-one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they'll take it even if it's negative. That's the
Mhm.
thing that's the most
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
about it. A lot of kids have learned that the only time they get any kind of recognition, the only
Mhm.
time they get any kind of attention is when it's negative.
Right.
Because when they are doing things that they're supposed to be doing, when they do things that
No
are
one praises
positive,
them.
nobody praises them, nobody notices them, nobody says anything, because it might just be that they're kind of in the middle there where nobody sees them, or
Mhm.
parents that really just are not paying attention. But
Mhm.
negative attention is attention.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, if a lot of times, if I notice I have a kid that likes that, it's because I
Mhm.
know that they're not getting attention in
Mhm.
other places. So if
Mhm.
I can find ways to give that child attention,
Mhm.
if I have a child that won't play the game and is
Mhm.
constantly trying to interrupt, then I'm
Mhm.
going to give him a job to do in the
Yes.
game. I'm
Yeah.
going to make him a leader. I'm going to
Mhm.
make him, and the reason why is because that's what he's wanting. He's wanting
Mhm.
some attention. He's wanting,
Mhm.
to have that moment where
Mhm.
somebody's just paying attention to him. And so, if I can find a way to encourage that in a positive way, then
Yes.
this one's
Yes.
going to be my helper. He's going to hold my pencils for me. He's going to, stand and hold the poster. He's going to be the one
Yeah.
to keep score. I'm
Yeah.
going to find something for him to do, because that's what he's needing. Is he's needing
Mhm.
that little extra bit of attention.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that I'm going to let him control the classroom.
Mm.
It
No.
just means that I'm going to try to provide for him a little bit of that attention in a more
Mhm.
positive way. And I'm going to really try to make sure that I give him
Mhm.
approval and let him know when
Yeah.
he's doing a good job, so that he gets that little bit of extra attention. And it's going to help a whole lot with just the classroom dynamics when you can do that.
Mhm.
The other thing that I find very interesting about preteens is that they understand when a peer is struggling.
Mm.
You think that they don't, but they
Mhm.
really do. And I've had a lot of teachers over the years will say things to me like, "Well, I don't do this for my special needs student because it's not fair to the other kids in the class."
Mhm.
But usually I find that the other kids in the class understand that that child has a special need.
Mhm.
They recognize it, and they
Mhm.
recognize when they have kids that are struggling around them.
Mhm.
And most of the time, they really just want to help too, because
Mhm.
again, we talked about how they're beginning to look at their community in a different way, and they're wanting to be more helpful, and they're seeing needs around them. And so usually if I have a child that is acting out, to give them some sort of what most people will look at, well, that's a privilege he didn't earn. A lot of the other kids will understand exactly why I've done it, or they understand exactly why that child needs it, because they know that that child has something else that's going on that needs attention. Now, not everyone, especially if you have another child that needs attention, they're not necessarily going to see it in anybody else.
Right.
But typically, as a group goes, you will find that if you do have to do something special for someone who has some sort of special need, they're going to understand, and they're going to support that and encourage that and try to help that.
And you know what's funny? That just resurrected a memory out of the depths of my brain of being a sixth grader. And this was at school. There was another child who was like really mean to me. Like we had assigned seating and we were next to each other. But I remember even as a sixth grader, because I'd overheard some adults talking, and I knew that this child's parents were going through a divorce.
Right.
And even as a sixth grader, I knew intuitively that they're being mean because of what they're going through. I somehow I just knew that like, this isn't even about me. Like, it's just because I'm the one that's assigned to sit next to them. And so I remember even as a child, just kind of understanding, like knowing what was going on in their life and understanding that like, this isn't even about me. And so it was just kind of like water off a duck. Like, I was like, okay, whatever. So it's funny. It's funny you talking about all that and kind of having that memory from the depths of my mind 100 years ago, you know, about kids being able to understand that. And I think we can also, if kids say, you know, that's not fair, like we can also say, look, like I am going to treat each of you fairly, each of you appropriately, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to treat you all the same exactly.
Right.
Because the same isn't always fair, because sometimes we need different things. And so I'm always going to make sure you get what you need. And I'm always going to make sure that I treat you in a way that is right for you, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be exactly the same. You're right. And you're right. Kids can, older kids especially, can understand that.
Yeah. Where it is harder for first, second, and third graders to understand, because they do tend to be very black and white, very right and wrong. You know, no, they did this, they need to be punished for this. I think you mentioned that when you were talking last time about like the kids who accidentally break several glasses, but on purpose broke one, you know, that kind of idea of like, they have a hard time understanding, where when you hit, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old, you're beginning to understand that the world is different. You're understanding that individuals are different. You're understanding needs are different. And so even though there is still that sense of, you know, a very like a self-centered view, because they are growing and they're awkward and they feel uncomfortable. And so they are very, very self-centered. They're beginning to understand the needs of others. And so they can see that when you are truly doing something that someone needs. Now, it might not be if you have like where teachers sometimes will favor a student and will do things over and over again. They will recognize that pretty quickly. And so they're going to see, So it really has to be your intentions of what you're doing and how you're doing it. But we do want to make sure that everybody's included and that everybody feels a part of things, because that's the other thing too. This age group can get incredibly discouraged very quickly. And so they do struggle. They love a challenge, but they like a challenge that they can actually complete,
accomplish.
So you want to make sure that things that you're asking them to do is something that developmentally they can do, because they will get frustrated very easily if they're trying to do something that they can't do. If it's an impossible task, then they are going to get incredibly frustrated, but they do get easily discouraged. And so that's where we really have to be very mindful of, when we're working with this age group, that we are encouraging them and supporting them and seeing when they have needs, giving them a little bit of time to be able to try to work some things out on their own, but being ready to jump in there to help kind of springboard to the next thing, or to help them to understand so that they can figure it out. We want to make sure, you know, we were talking about kids understanding when there are other children that have needs, but we don't want to point that out in the classroom.
Right.
We don't want to say, well,
Yes.
Tommy needs that extra time to read.
Right.
Tommy doesn't need to hear you tell that to everyone
Right.
else.
Right.
You want to say, well, I'm just giving everyone a couple of extra minutes to be sure that everybody's had time to read. You don't have to say, well, Tommy's a slow reader and I have to give him extra time. You
Right.
want to,
That's bad.
because again,
Oh.
they do get very embarrassed very easily at this age. And so because they are so self-aware and of, like they're so self-centered of thinking that everybody's looking at them, everybody's watching them, everybody's doing. And so we want to make sure that we're encouraging them. Be aware of things that they are interested in. Because if you can pull the name of a musician or a TV show or a video game out of your hat that they think that you're too old to understand, you will win them over for life. You will win them over for life. And so it's kind of keeping up with, oh, this is what preteens are listening to. This is what's playing on Disney Plus right now that everybody's watching. This is the video game that just came out that everybody is loving. And it doesn't mean you have to know and do all of those things. You don't have to play it. But maybe you could just read about it so you know a little bit about it. So you can mention a character or you can, ask some questions. Ask their interests, find out what things they like. Let them tell you about their week. Let them tell you about their ball game. Let them tell you about those kinds of things. If you have the ability to attend a ball game, any kind of sporting event that they might be involved in,
or recital, their piano recital, their ballet, whatever it is.
If you can, and I know that it's really hard to do that. And so it's not like I'm saying that you have to do that.
You don't have to go to everyone.
But especially if you have a child that you're really struggling to connect with, I'm telling you, if they see you, I always remember that I had just started at a church, and I had only been there for maybe 3 or 4 months. And there was a ball game with the high school kids, and I was the children's minister. I really wasn't involved with the youth that much. I mean, I knew youth. I was learning who they were, but we went to this ball game, and my husband had an event at work that night, and so we had to leave. So we had seen the girls' game, but we had to leave before the boys' game started. And so when I was on my way out, one of the high school boys stopped me that I hate to say I didn't even know his first name, because like I said, I'd only been there a couple of months and I hadn't really met the youth that well yet. And he stopped me and he was like, "Oh, Mrs. Davidson, you're leaving." And I said, "Yes, we have to go to this event for my husband for work." And so we left, and it ended up, it wasn't a very long event. It didn't take us very long. And we were on our way home, and we were going back by the church when we were headed home. And my husband said, "Hey, you want to see if we can catch the second half of the boys' game?" And I was like, "Sure." So we stopped at the church and we watched the end of the boys play. That youth ran up to me after and gave me a hug and said, "I'm so glad you came back and you got to see us win." And then he just ran off to the locker room. But I looked at Lewis and I was like, how did he even notice that we were back? Like, he was playing in this game. And so this was a kid that I really didn't have a lot of interaction with, but he really noticed that we had come back. And so it was one of those moments where I realized how important it is for them to be seen, and how important it is for them when they think that people are showing an interest in them. And I know that was an older youth, but I've always kind of used that when I've been thinking about how I can build relationships better with all of my children that I teach, because it's just being there for them. It's just showing up. It's just encouraging them in some way, even if you can only be at a couple of minutes of a ball game. The idea is that you cared enough to even show up for a couple of minutes. So it's such a fun age, and there's so much to learn, and there's so much more that we could talk about, but I feel like this has given us a really kind of good overview of those, 10-year-old, 11-year-olds, 12-year-old kids that we might have in our ministry, and how we can reach out to them a little bit more, how we can minister to them more, how we can teach them better. All right. So what's next, Dr. Virginia?
Let's talk a little bit about our teen years. I know this is a kids ministry podcast, but really let's get all the way through to adulthood, because, even after they leave our ministry, we still love and care about our kids and our teens. And so one thing with puberty, as we talked about with our preteens, they are
Yes.
entering into puberty, and that
Mhm.
is beginning. Puberty sets off. So we talked in our last episode about, and when we were talking about the toddler years,
Mhm.
we talked about a process called synaptic pruning, and
Yes.
puberty sets off a second round of this process of synaptic pruning, where the brain has been throughout childhood slowly
Mhm.
building more and more and more neural connections.
Mhm.
And in puberty, in the teenage years, it is honing and refining itself to become the adult brain that kids will have and carry into adulthood. Now, the brain doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s.
That's a very important thing to remember that I don't think people always realize is that it does
Yes.
not.
One thing with brain development is that brain development happens back to front.
Mhm.
And so in the rear of our brain, like right on top of our brainstem is the cerebellum, and that's what
Mhm.
controls our motor development. And then all the way up here in the very, very front, right on our forehead, right behind our forehead and our eyes is our prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain that does logic, decision making, it controls us. It helps us, inhibit things that we shouldn't say or shouldn't do that are maybe, dumb or whatever. And so this is why we can have teenagers, college students, young people who are great athletes. Their
Mhm.
motor skills are very developed. They're these
Right.
wonderful athletes who then make really like dumb decisions and
Yes.
lose their college scholarship or things
Right.
like that. This part of their brain that controls movement is highly developed, and the part of their brain that
Mhm.
controls logic, decision making, right here behind the forehead, is still growing and developing until the mid-20s. And so we see this process in the teen years of synaptic pruning.
Mhm.
And one of the things that whenever I talk about teens in particular,
Mhm.
and I've actually shared this with teens as well. That was fun at a youth camp. Um, so in the teen years, so we have this process of the brain honing and refining itself.
Mhm.
And then we also have certain things such as drug use,
Mhm.
pornography use,
Right.
that also have very profound effects on the brain.
Mhm.
And those effects are amplified in the teen years
Right.
because of this process of synaptic pruning. And so we know with neuroplasticity, our brains grow and change over the course of a lifetime. It is never too late to change our habits. But our habits are what wire our brains.
Mhm.
Our environment, our habits are what guide this process of synaptic pruning, of honing and refining the brain.
Mhm.
And so I always encourage teens to be very intentional with the habits they do and don't have,
Right.
because that really is building and wiring their brain for adulthood. And so
Mhm.
we can build and wire into our brains lots of really great habits to carry for the rest of their lives. Or unfortunately, we can build and wire in negative habits that
Yes.
will be something to be overcome in the adult years. And
Right.
so went and staffed like a week-long youth camp, and they're asking for people to do breakout sessions. So I did a breakout session on neuroscience and spiritual formation.
Ooh.
And so we talked about all kinds of interesting stuff. But yes, to a room of mixed gendered teenagers, I taught them about the effects of drug use, pornography, that sort of stuff on their brain,
Right.
because I do want them to know and understand, because our society says it's no big deal. Our society says
Yes.
it's fine. Our society says do you.
Right.
But increasingly, if we look at the science behind it, we know that there are very, very profound effects of all these things. And so I do think it is worth teaching that to our youth so that they know the truth.
I think it helps them to understand themselves better when they understand that our brains are forming at this age. And so there's things that are changing and things that you are able to do and things that you aren't able to do. And it's not just that you aren't able to do something because you just can't, it's because certain areas of your brain are working differently. That's why it's so important when you're talking with youth that are not making wise decisions to help them understand they do have control,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not always making the wisest decisions. So we still have to help guide them and help them
Yes.
learn and understand that. I also think we have to remember that. I don't know if you remember this person that came to do a presentation for us during our doctoral program. But she was bringing in a study that they had done with older teen boys,
Mm-hmm.
seniors and freshmen in college,
Mm-hmm.
where they were showing them videos, pictures of people and they were experiencing different emotions. Like the person in the
Mm-hmm.
picture looked afraid. The
Mm-hmm.
person in the picture looked sad. The person
Mm-hmm.
in the picture looked scared. And they
Mm-hmm.
were having them define
Mm-hmm.
what emotion the person on the screen was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
these older, teenage boys
Mm-hmm.
were getting them wrong
Yeah.
over and over and over again, because she was saying that the chemical makeup of the brain did not allow them to be able to interpret emotion. They had not matured enough to be able to interpret emotion. And there was just this light bulb that went on in so many people in the room saying, "Oh, because when you have a teenager
Mm-hmm.
and you're expecting them to show you compassion when you feel sad, and they just kind of walk through the room with their chips and their headphones on and they just keep going. It's not necessarily that they're just being rude or that they don't care
Right.
about you. It's just that their brain is not processing the
Right.
fact that you're
Right.
sitting there crying."
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so,
Right.
we have to understand that some of the things that our children are doing are natural
Mm-hmm.
things that they are doing as they grow, and they don't mean it necessarily to
Mm-hmm.
be as harsh and as hurtful as
Right.
things turn out
Right.
to be. And so
Right.
I find that so interesting.
Right. Well, and it's one thing too. Studies have shown that teenagers have a very hard time still imagining and taking the perspective of another person, and
Right.
so we know that preschoolers can't do that, but teens still
Right.
struggle with that as well. They are still developing those abstract thinking skills, just like what you're saying, to infer what another person is thinking from the emotions on their face. I mean, all these processes that we do in an instant as adults are actually
Mhm.
like really complex.
They are.
And it takes a lot of knowledge and experience for our brains to accurately make inferences
Mhm.
about other people, about their emotions, about what they're
Right.
thinking or feeling. And so, so sometimes our teens may feel like we expect them to be mind readers, and
Right.
we feel like it should be obvious.
Obvious. Why can you not? Do you not see? This is just, yeah,
Right, but
for
really it's
sure.
just a disconnect in how we experience the world as adults
Right.
and where teens are at developmentally.
Yeah.
And so they're learning all these things still.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to remember that. Teens are also, we talked about this starting in the preteen years, beginning really to solidify their identity. Teens and young adults are deciding, who they are and who they're going to be, solidifying their values. It's really
Mhm.
valuable and important for us in the childhood years to lay that foundation of values, because teens evaluate and decide, what they're going to keep, what they're going to
Mhm.
leave.
Right.
And so teens are deciding, of that foundation that we've laid, is it worth keeping,
Mhm.
or should they dig it up and lay a new foundation?
Right.
And so it's so valuable for us to, in the years leading up to that,
Mhm.
lay that firm foundation of biblical values. And then in the teen years, as they have questions, being open to say, I don't always know the answer to that, but
Mhm.
we can work through that together. We can find
Yeah.
that answer together. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
being patient and non-reactive as teenagers work through their questions, and let them know
Yes,
that it's okay to ask questions,
it is.
and work through them to answers, and to find
Yeah.
the answers and the solutions to the
Yeah.
things and the values that they're developing.
I've always said that God is big enough to handle our hard questions.
Amen.
And so many times in church, we feel almost offended when people ask hard questions, or we feel
Mm,
like they're being
like disrespectful,
disrespectful.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
And so we have to remember that, God wants us to ask questions. He wants us to learn. He wants us to have a relationship. And so questions are part of that. And letting kids know that there is never a wrong question, that they can ask anything. And I think that that's really important.
So, there's always so much more that we could talk about with
For
our
sure.
teenagers. Again, we could do, we could talk about this whole topic of development for, hours and hours.
No. And hopefully we will talk about it more
Some
later
more.
on.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But we're going to wrap it up here. And so hopefully this has been a helpful time as you think about and structure your time teaching children and just the way that we interact with them.
Yes, it's a lot of fun. Thank you, Dr. Virginia. It was a
Yes.
fun conversation
Thank
today.
you, Dr. Val.
And friends, we are so glad that you joined us. We are so excited that we actually achieved over 100 subscribers on our YouTube page.
Yay!
So our YouTube page has a name. We actually have a channel now, and it's easier to find us. And so we are also now working on getting our episodes uploaded to Podbean, to Spotify, to Apple Podcasts, so that you can listen to our podcast if you would prefer to listen to us in that method. We have a few up there already, but we're getting the rest of them kind of transferred over and getting everything set up. So we are really excited to be growing, to be able to provide more opportunities for you to be able to find us. We would love to hear from you. We would love for you to make some comments, to send us an email, to get us any information. We would love suggestions on things that you would like to hear about, because we want to be ministering to you and where you are and the needs that you have. So we hope that you all have a great week, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.